Okay, so I'm going to be talking about personal development plan, how to achieve your goals, and I think this is a topic that I kind of wish I knew more about it, and that people taught me about it 10 years ago, or when I started my training, and over the years though we managed to sort of pick up a few tips and tricks on how to do this sort of thing. And I think it's neglected in teaching programs. So I thought it'd be useful to um, to try and share some of my experiences, and we can have a hopefully good discussion at the end. So the first thing to say is regarding careers and career paths, and that everybody has their own career path and very individual. Even though you may end up in the same at the same ending, so you may become, for example, a consultant specialist. To get to that route can be very different, many different paths to that route. For some of you, you may not have any set career progression. So physician associates, for example, it's something very new and there's no established career path as such. And even for medics, there is some degree of structure in the sense that you go out of medical school, you go into foundation training, you go into core training, then you may do your specialty training, you may go out of research, and then you become a consultant. But there's so many different crossroads, and there are so many different variations. What I'd like to say is just to reassure you that actually it all works out well in the end. And although there's a lot of anxiety along the route, that it all does actually work out pretty well in the end. The fact that you have different parts and you've done different things, that should enrich you as a person, and you should try to bring that to your whatever your stage you're at. Try to bring your experiences to try to benefit yourself and others in your career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about goals and all the different types of goals and what we can do to try to achieve them. And I'm going to mention and go through a personal development plan and how this is a useful tool that we can use to help us achieve our goals. And then I'm going to go through some tips and tricks that I've picked up and bits of wisdom that's been handed down over the years. So there may be some repetition of things that you already know, but hopefully there might be something you may benefit from. So let's talk about goals. So this is a picture taken at a great moment. I'm a Manchester United fan, so this was a spectacular goal, and some of you may remember it. And for those who can't quite remember it, I've just brought this video here. Now, the reason I've shown this is because so Wayne Rooney, he scored a spectacular goal a couple of years ago, and we can see the end product of his skill and how skillful he is at playing football. And now, what we don't see are the years of his hard work and his grafting and his the mundane training that he goes through. So often to just remember that sometimes we have to put our head down, work hard, and then we will get there. We will achieve the things that we want to achieve as long as we practice and plan for it. So let's talk about a goal. What's the definition of a goal? So a goal is the object of a person's ambition or their effort, something that they want to achieve, something desired result, something that they want, an aim or objective. And actually, when we look at goals, there are different types of goals in various aspects of our lives. So we may be mainly focusing on career, but actually you may have other goals in your life. For example, family, goals, spirituality, social, community work. You might be interested in politics, art or music or sports. or a combination of all of these things, or even other things as well. The thing with goals is that you have to remember that goals can change, and things which may have been a priority for you at a certain stage of your life, a few years down, later down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line, those goals may not be so important to you, and you may have other goals which may be more important. So don't think of a goal as something that's static. It often is moving. So one of the things that I found useful in my sort of practice is that I split up my goals into 3 main parts. So I look at my long-term goals, things that I want to achieve 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and then things that I may want to achieve in the medium term, so by the end of the year or within 6 months, and then I have goals which are short-term, things which may be day-to-day goals, or by the end of the week or month-to-month sort of goals. They're short-term goals. Now, what can often happen is that you can get distracted with the short-term goals, particularly in hospital environment, because you'll have people coming up to you on a day-to-day basis asking you to do various different things which you were not even planning to do. And those short-term day-to-day tasks and goals can often detract from your longer-term goals. So it's important to be aware of that and to plan to make sure that what you're doing in your day-to-day activities actually will be reflected in terms of achieving your medium and long-term goals. So why did I put this slide up? So this is to demonstrate how when we talk about goals, sometimes we have shared goals, and there are people in your team who do share your goals and want to help you achieve what you want to achieve. So that's something to bear in mind, and to be mindful, whatever environment you're in, to identify those type of people who might be able to help you and support you in achieving your goals. At the same time, you may also have people who are there to obstruct you and to prevent you from achieving your goals, like this goalkeeper, for example. So that's something to bear in mind wherever you are, whichever environment you're in, that think about the people that are around you and who are those that may help you and who are those may be obstructive. They may be obstructive not because of you, because it's not an individual thing, and maybe just they have their own goals, which might conflict with yours. So in terms of the personal development plan, what is it? Well, I would describe it as a tool, and it's something that we've actually in medicine, something that we've had to do every year, and you may have various different iterations of this plan, but it's essentially there as a form of documentation where you can document where you are in your training and what it is that you'd like to achieve, and how you want to go about achieving it. So that's what the personal development plan, and it's something which you'll find in your portfolio, whether it's e-portfolio, for example. Now, why is it important? It's important because it's a formal documentation, and it should be done at the beginning of any rotation. So if you're at the start of the year, usually is when we write our plans, and it's usually covering the period of time that we're going to be there for usually a year. So how do we make the most out of it? So here is an example of my PDP, and it's a template that we use for cardiology specialty training. And as you can see, it's very simple. You have a title, then it asks what specific development needs do I have? Okay. How will these objectives be addressed? What's the time scale? Then there's an area to that you come back later on, periodically during your time, looking at evaluating and looking at the outcome. In other words, how have you achieved your objectives, and in what evidence do you have to show that you've achieved it? And then in our one, we have this little tick box to say that it's been achieved. Okay, so before I talk about how to achieve your goals, I think it's important to think about how we can set our goals. And actually, you may have heard of this SMART goal setting, and it's actually quite a nice little thing to help us to set up our goals. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So when we want to set a goal, first of all, it has to be something specific. So you have to actually specify in detail exactly what it is you want to achieve, rather than having something very vague. It has to be something which is measurable, because how will you know whether you've achieved it or not without being able to measure it? So you have to it has to be something measurable. It has to be something which is achievable. And when we talk about achievable, in terms of you have to be able to have the resources available wherever you are to achieve that goal. So for example, there's no use to say, well, I want to become an expert in implanting pacemakers when you're working in a hospital where they don't do pacemakers. So that's just not achievable. Realistic. So it's important that you set goals which are realistic, that you can actually do in the time frame that you want to do it in. So you should, and this is something that can be difficult. To what would you classify as being realistic? And sometimes you may need to speak to other people around you. You may need to look at people who are more senior than you. What did they achieve in their time? So it allows you to sort of have a radar of what is a reasonable and realistic goal. And finally, it has to be something that's timely. So there's no point setting a goal that's going to take you a long time to do. So you have to be able to time it and specify over which time period are you going to achieve that particular goal. So for example, you may decide, well, I want to be good at writing discharge summaries, and I want to be able to write a discharge summary within a specific period of time, so 10-15 minutes. And then you can measure that and assess, is it achievable, that sort of thing. So here is my real life PDP for my final year, and I'm sharing it, but not to say that it's good, actually to show this is real life, and there are some good aspects and there are some aspects which are not so good. So I'll just go in a bit more detail with that. So for example, how did I do in terms of what specific development needs do I have? So I've literally listed out things which I specifically want to achieve and that I need to achieve, and I've split it out in terms of being specific to say that in this particular procedure I want to be independent, whereas in another procedure which is a bit more complex, it's not realistic for me to be independent in it. So it's more realistic that I try to develop my experience and perhaps gain more experience. Develop leadership and team working skills further. Perhaps there I've been a little bit vague. That's not very specific enough, I would say, if I was going to evaluate myself there. How will these objectives be addressed? So as you can see, I've listed out actual things I'm going to do to achieve those objectives. Involves attending courses or doing meetings and preparing cases and being involved in research projects, as well as having exposure with cath lab lists. I put a timescale there that it will be achieved in 1 year. I've only got 1 year left of my training there, so I couldn't make it any longer. And that I will evaluate the progress in 6 months' time. And then here's my evaluation and my outcome by the end of the year, that I managed to achieve many of the things that I've wanted to achieve, and I've put in there some of the evidence for it, and then I managed to tick it, and it has been achieved. Okay, so when we have all these goals that we want to achieve, sometimes it can be appear to be quite difficult for us. Our lives can be quite difficult in the sense that we have to juggle a lot of things. So whether it's audits and research or daily clinical commitments, family commitments, all of these sort of things. And we have to be mindful that we want to be seen to be good and be productive and that sort of thing. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of the risks of burnout and be aware of what the symptoms are of burnout and how we can try to avoid that situation. Now, I liken sort of projects and productivity a bit like spinning, plates, and this is the dream of what we think we're going to be like in terms of how good we are at juggling all of these different various aspects of our careers. That's what we dream about, but actually, the reality is very different. So I think that's something that we often fumble our way through life. Now, I'm going to spend the next sort of 10 minutes going through now some of the tips and sharing some of my experiences and things that I've been passed down and learned over the years, and things that I've tried to incorporate in my daily practice. So the first thing that I would say that is really important is planning and organization. I think it's really key to being successful in achieving your goals. And you have to try and give yourself enough time to achieve the things that you want to do. So I think I mentioned it earlier that if you have something which is a goal, a long-term goal, you must make sure that your day-to-day activities reflect that. So you yourselves are able to organize your timetable in such a way that you can ensure that by the end of the time period, you will achieve the things that you're looking to achieve. So, for example, here is was my timetable in ST7. So you can see that I had clinics and I had time in the lab and pacing and EP lab to be able to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve. I also had a session where I could do research or audit. So these are things that you should try to plan and give yourself enough time to do that and to achieve things you want to achieve. Try to use the available tools and resources, and now we're very lucky in 2020 with smartphone technology, with advances in internet, and we have so many tools and resources available. And some of these tools may not be necessarily designed for medicine, but we can still incorporate them and use them. So this is a shared calendar called Teamer that we used. One of the registrars I worked with, he suggested to use this, and we use this to plan who is working in which lab, and it allowed us to be very organized. And so, for example, if there was somebody who was away or on call, they would remove themselves from the lab, and then everybody could see that it was a free session. And that way, we had the training opportunities were there for other people to grab. So if I was away, somebody else could take the opportunity to make use of my my training session. Try to be creative with what you've got. So, for example, if you're using a lot of emails, try to set up folders. And I think one of the things that I did when I was in my last place, and even now I use this, is that I have two folders, which one of them is to do, and the other one is done. And this has helped me deal with a lot of the emails that I get. So if I get sent an email, I'll scan it and then I'll see, well, is this something I can deal with right now, or something I can leave for another time, for my admin time, for example. So then I'll just put that email in the to-do folder. When I have my admin session, I can sit down and go through that folder in sort of a nice organized manner. And the most satisfying thing is when you've done it, and then you can just move it to the done folder. So that's something that I would recommend. The second important thing is efficiency and prioritization. So when I talk about efficiency, I'm talking about the things that we do in our work. So we have tasks. A lot of our work is task orientated, and we should look at how are we completing those tasks. What are the processes involved? What are the steps we're taking? And we should refine that, continuously look at ways to improving our processes to make it more efficient and to improve our workflow. So this is an example for making a cup of tea, and this works very well if you're making a single cup of tea. But if you're making 100 cups of tea, then perhaps you need to adjust and change to make it more efficient. So this is something that's important that we look at what we're doing and refine our processes and have that attitude that we constantly want to be better at what we're doing. In order to do that and be successful, you need to study your performance. So this is Mohamed Salah, the Liverpool football player. And there's a website called whoscored.com, and there's a software called Y-Scout as well. And what it does is it takes detailed analysis of everything that he does. So somebody is watching him, counting the number of passes that he does, the number of completed passes, the number of goals that he scored, the number of offsides, the number of free kicks, etc. Literally a detailed analysis of everything that he's doing. And this is something that we don't do, but it's very important that we study our performance and measure what we're doing. And that way, that's the only way really you can track your performance, see the areas that you're good at, and get objective evidence of the areas that you need to work on and improve on. So do things in a time-dependent order. So force yourself to have deadlines for various aspects of things that you need to achieve, and make sure that you do the things which are most pressing. And I find that actually helps you to actually achieve the things that you want to achieve. There's many times when you want to do something, but you've missed the deadline, and you've missed out on a training opportunity, or you've missed out on a poster, or you've missed out on a presentation, or you missed out on something. So keep a record in your calendar and put the deadlines. And one of the examples I give is that when I was doing my research, my professor had a calendar, and his calendar was the deadlines for the submission of abstracts of various conferences that he knew he wanted to go to that conference. So he would say, right, for this conference, this is the deadline. So you can work your projects towards that deadline, that actually I'm going to spend the next 6 months working on this project with the hope that I'm going to get it in an abstract form so I can submit it by this particular deadline. So I think it's very important that you have these deadlines in your calendar and in your mind. Thirdly, this concept of unitasking versus multitasking, and I've put there that multitasking is a myth, and I think I would agree with that. I think that we'd like to do a lot of things at the same time, but actually our brain capacity is not good enough to do that. And often when we do try and do lots of things at the same time, then we often don't do it very well, and some things may not be at the right standard. So I think it's important to probably avoid multitasking and to do unitasking. So what is unitasking? So unitasking means that when you have you have your set tasks that you want to do. So you've got 4 or 5 things that you need to work on. Rather than open them all up at the same time and sit down and try and do them all, just take one of those and start and give yourself however long it takes, whether it's 1 hour, 2 hours, afternoon or a day, and just work on that single task until either you finish the task or your set time has passed, and then you can move on to the next thing. And I find that actually is more effective, because then you can really concentrate on the things that you're doing and do it well, and you're less stressed in a way because you're actually achieving things. So that's the approach that I tend to use. Now there are some tasks that are going to take you maybe 6 months to do. So that doesn't mean you just spend months doing it. You may just decide, well, I'm going to allocate 2 hours a week on this particular project, and you use those 2 hours every week, and by the end of your time, 6 months down the line, your task would have been completed. Why is this important? So there is something called problem of rework. Now the NHS have got an initiative called Getting It Right First Time, and the idea is that when patients come for procedures, for example, we want to make sure that the person is getting the right procedure at the right time, and getting it right the first time, actually, rather than them having to come back again for another procedure or a redo procedure. So what does this mean, the problem of rework? Is that if we don't do things properly the first time, it just means that we have to go back and spend a lot of time doing it again. Either it's you having to do it again, or some of your colleagues have to do it again. And when they've analysed organisations, they found that actually a large proportion of the person's time is spent fixing problems because of mistakes that have been made, because the things weren't done properly the first time. So as you can see, and in the construction industry, they suffer from this a lot. And you can see this on the right here. You can see this picture of this upside down house. Now somebody's built this house upside down, so they're going to have to do it again. They're going to knock it down and rebuild it. Fourthly, this thing about saying yes and no. So it's on the one hand, it's very important to grasp opportunities, but at the same time, it's also important to know when not to do it. So the first thing I'd say is just do it. Don't worry about things. Just go for it. And when you have an opportunity comes your way, take the opportunities, and that life will show you. But you don't know where it's going to take you, and you don't know what doors will open, and a lot of good things can happen as a result of you just saying yes. So I think that's something important. Be positive. Now I've got here about seize, seek, create opportunities. I think opportunities are there in 3 ways. Firstly, and this is very rare, but it can happen, is that somebody can come up to you and say, here you go, I'm going to give you this opportunity in your hand. You've done nothing, but I'm going to give it to you. Here you go. Now, in that situation, you have to seize that opportunity when it comes in front of you, and you just have to take that opportunity and seize it. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, we have to go out and seek the opportunities. So we have to knock on someone's door, we have to ask questions, find out information, research things, and just ask and email and seek out for opportunities. Thirdly, creating opportunities. That is the highest level you can be at, is where you don't rely on other people, but you are able to create the opportunities yourself. And that's something that's very very useful to be able to do that. Saying no is difficult, and sometimes we're in a situation where we're asked to do things and we may not be able to do it. And rather than saying no, we say yes, and then we end up being in more difficulty because we're under stress and we're not able to achieve the things we want to achieve. So sometimes there'll be a project. Your supervisor will ask you, "Can you do this?" You don't want to say no, and then you end up being so busy you can't do it, and then they end up getting annoyed with you. So I would rather be in a position where someone said to me, "Look, Thank you for asking me, but I can't, I can't, I can't do this particular project. I've already got an audit, for example, and I won't be able to do to contribute for at least another month or 2 months. And at least then you can then give it back to that person. They can decide whether or not they can wait those 2 months for you, or whether or not they'll find somebody else. And I'd rather somebody told me up front that they can't do something, rather than say you can do it and then not do it. So the last few things here I'm going to talk about. So giving up to gain. So sometimes you're going down a certain path and you're not getting anywhere. And in fact, as the more you're going down that path, the worse things are. So sometimes you have to recognize this, and you have to give up to gain. So you have to take a few steps back, realign, restart, and then you can move in a smooth fashion. We do this quite a lot in the cath lab. We're in a procedure, we get to a certain state or level, and then we realize that we're in a bit of trouble. So we end up going back a few steps, and then we do it again, and this time everything's works out well. Try to maximize your output and your focus. So when you're doing something, think about the big picture. How can you maximize the output for the input that you've put in, the hard work that you've put in? How can you maximize it? So for example, on the left, you've got orange. So you've got oranges. You can have oranges, you can just eat them. You can cut them up and just eat them. You can squeeze them, make them into juice, or you can, I wouldn't advise that, but you can use it as a face mask, for example. So that's the idea, is that when you're doing a project, try to maximize it. And on the right hand side, I've just got an example from my own personally. I completed a loop of an audit on cardioversion in AF. I was then able to present that at a local cardiology meeting, so that counted as a presentation. I then submitted it, and it was accepted for a poster presentation at the regional meeting. I was then able to use that as an example of service development and management, as well as teamwork. I also did a lot of self-directed learning on the topic, and that self-directed learning, I was able to inform me to help me do teaching for medical students and junior doctors on AF. And then later on, all of that effort that I put into it made it much easier for me as the basis for me to then go on and write further sort of review articles and publications on atrial fibrillation. Okay, so I think this speaks for itself, really. In everything you do, try to focus more on the quality. So rather than just the quantity. So for example, if you want to get publications, don't just try to get 10 publications. Get 1 or 2 really high powered or good quality publications. Avoid fruitless tasks and projects. So often we will be faced with lots of different projects and tasks and things that people want us to do, and they'll say to us, "Oh, I want you to, can you get involved in this? This is, it's going to be great." And actually, you need to take a step back and ask yourself, what's the purpose of this? What is going to be achieved by this? What are we trying to achieve? And sometimes you can put a lot of effort into doing something, and it's very frustrating because you put all that effort into it, and actually it doesn't come to anything, because it was pointless. Like for example, in this cartoon, I mean, this poor person is pushing this boulder up this hill, and for what purpose? There's no benefit in doing that. So always think about, what is it you're trying to achieve? What are you going to gain from doing this? What are the benefits? I've mentioned this before. Be realistic. Know what you can and can't achieve. Don't overburden yourself, otherwise you'll feel disappointment. It's better for you to achieve smaller goals, and that makes you feel positive, the fact that you've achieved a smaller goal, rather than try to set yourself huge and very over ambitious targets and goals. Review your progress regularly. So for example, you may start a project, and as you're going through it, then you may start something else and be involved in something else, and then you may be involved in a third project or a fourth, and then you can then as you're working on that, you can then go back and look what's happening with the first project, the second project. So make sure you're reviewing your progress on a regular basis to see how you're getting on. Is your training going well? If your other goals going well? This project, is that going well? And sometimes you need to put a little bit of emphasis on one aspect to sort of keep things moving. Be flexible. I think, as well as being realistic, I think it's important to be flexible to your surroundings and where you are, and adjust yourself so that you can adapt to the situations that you're in. I think that's a really useful advice. I think it's really important skill to have, to be able to be flexible. Don't be too rigid in your ways and your thinking and the way that you do things. Be open to other suggestions, and sometimes you'll find that actually you were proven wrong, because sometimes you find something, you think, this is terrible, I can't do it like this. This is not a way, this is not how we do this. But actually, if you're open-minded, you might actually find it may actually be better than the way that you have done things. And this is something that comes up quite a lot in training. So when you're training to do something, you've learned to do it one way, and you come across another situation where they're asking you to do it in a different way. So I think it's important to be flexible. Teamwork, okay. Yeah, I think teamwork and leadership is really important. And I think it really is true that you can get more done in teams. You can get things done have a team around you to help you. And I mentioned that earlier about how you can build a team around you, positivity, and to allow you to be more productive, allow you to get more things done. So being able to delegate things, and also knowing your team and picking your team and choosing people in your team who have particular assets or particular areas that they're better at than you. So I think it's important to have that sense of teamwork. Take the opportunity to develop your leadership skills. No matter, so some people say, well, I'm not a leader, but actually everyone has the opportunity to be a leader. And leader may just be of a small group of 2 or 3. Take the opportunities to develop your leadership. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a leader all the time in everything, and you have to know when you can be a leader and when it's not your time to be a leader. That's also quite important. Handover. Handover is very important. Because often when we're training, we're moving around from one place to another. So when you're planning your projects, think about, when is it going to end, and when are you moving on, and who are you going to hand over to next? And do you have a system in place where you know that I'm going to be leaving, but I'm going to hand it over to this colleague, and someone that you trust will actually continue the work that you've done? Because one of the worst things that can happen is that you do put all this effort and you do a lot of work, then you leave, and then nothing happens after that, and everything just falls apart, and you've just wasted all that effort. So this is the last few slides now, or the last slide really, is that it's very important. Civility is really, really important. To be civil, to be polite, respectful, and be positive, and develop good relationships with people, and develop good positive environments to be in. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be in that environment, so you might as well try to affect it in a positive way, so that it makes your life a lot better, and it makes everyone else's life a lot better. So in conclusion, enjoy your career path. Don't stress about it. Set your personal goals. Use the personal development plan. It is a useful tool. Think about your goals. Be smart in the way that you think about your goals. And I've mentioned some of the main, on the top right hand side here, some of the main tips to be successful. So I'm just going to check whether there are any burning questions that anyone might have. Thank you very much.